Welcome to our new podcast series. In our first episode, we talk with the everyday chef, Luke Sutherland from Perth, Australia. Luke is a 20-plus year veteran of the restaurant industry turned entrepreneur. After being laid off from his restaurant job during the COVID-19 lockdown, he decided to make a major career pivot and become his own boss. In March, he and his business partner, a front-of-house coworker who was also laid off, launched The Butler and the Chef, a company designed to bring the experience of fine dining into the age of social distancing. They currently offer intimate dinner parties and small events throughout Perth and Western Australia. In this episode, we chat about the transition from chef to self-employment, the challenges that come with paying yourself a fair rate, finding your motivation, and how being ready is a myth. We also dive deep into issues like mindset, self-worth, and depression in cooks, food sustainability, eating local, and social responsibility, truly embracing your authenticity and finding your culinary voice, taking control of your free time and setting boundaries with work, and what the new normal might look like for the restaurant and hospitality industry. Luke is an absolute powerhouse of inspiration, and we hope you enjoy listening to this chat as much as we enjoyed having it. I'm your host, Heather Fair, and this is the Restaurant Reset with Luke Sutherland, recorded on July 17th, 2020.
I'm Chef Luke Sutherland. Been living in Australia my whole life. Started off in a little place called McLaren, which is very well renowned for its amazing red wine and good food. I then made my way up to the Kimberley region, which is a really, really amazing part of the world. There's just the nature up there is insane, but also the food scene, especially dealing with sort of native Australian bush products, has really opened my eyes to how we can kind of introduce that more into restaurants and make it a bit more of a landmark.
Awesome. So we're going to start with a little bit of a background, like a get to know who we're talking to and what you stand for and kind of things like that. So what initially drew you to the restaurant industry?
I think there's a part of growing up in a region where food is quite affluent anyway. But I think the main sort of drive, which I'm sure a lot of chefs do find, is that I wasn't very good at school. It was from a very young age where I realized that a formal education was something that really wasn't resounding with me. So I, at the ripe old age of 14, decided to leave school, and the passion that I had for creativity, and I knew that I was going to end up in either music or art or something involving sort of a passion of creativity. And I think a little bit of not sort of fitting into the mainstream is where a lot of chefs, I find themselves drawn to food. I feel like chefs in general are a bit of a band of misfits. We sort of stick out from the norm, and I think that's how I sort of found myself drawn to hospitality.
14, that's crazy young. What was your life like at that time? Like, was it kind of chaotic and unpredictable? Were you like lost at all? Or was it like a clear direction of like, this is what I want to be doing? Or did you just kind of like find it?
I think at the age of 14, you don't really know what you want to do in life. But
it's true. Except in very rare circumstances.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's definitely something that drew me, and I knew that there was definitely something that I was drawn to about food, and seeing the look on people's faces when you cook something and they sit down and they're in awe of, I think food is something that is very primal to humans. We're drawn around food because it brings people together, and I think that togetherness is what I love seeing, is creating experiences where it basically gets everybody out of the rush of life and brings us together for that half an hour moment where we sit down and actually talk and eat and spend time together. I think that's a pivotal thing that for me is the reason why I'm in hospitality.
That's awesome. And I think that's like so relatable to so many people too. And also I think you touched on the the other aspect of food that not many people openly talk about, but is very prevalent, is that instant gratification. You know, when you make something and then like, you don't have to wait until you're dead for 50 years to be recognized for your art. Like, you put the plate of food on the table and it's like, you know, if somebody likes it or not. And if they don't like it, like, you can find ways to adapt and adjust in the moment. And so it's like you get feedback almost instantly, which I think is like a really big draw for people. I know creatively it was for me too.
Yeah. And I think if you take a look at social media and platforms like that, what is the one thing that is probably on the top of the list of all photographed Instagram profiles and things from influencers? It's all food. Food is like up there with, you know, fashion and everything like that. So
yep.
I think it's definitely that instant gratification which you're talking about.
Totally. When you started cooking, like, where did you think you'd be in 10 years? Did you have any idea?
I have no idea. Like my journey as a chef has, I suppose like a lot of chefs, has gone from, you know, relative highs to pretty depressing lows. You know, you kind of, the first 10 years of my cooking experience was, I suppose it was, I would like to call it the awkward phase of hospitality in the late 90s, where we kind of lost a little bit of direction with the way that food is presented, the way that the flavors are put together. We were stuck in the East meets West kind of awkward phase of trying to mix flavors together, and it is definitely
everything.
changed. Yeah, absolutely. I think that the biggest thing is I find that the industry, I feel, and tell me if I'm wrong, but fashion has a way of, you know, being amazing in the moment, and everybody thinks, oh wow, you know, look at those clothes, you know, remember what we were wearing in the 90s. But I think the same kind of relates to food in a way, but we kind of, it's hard to say. I honestly think that the food that we're putting out now is so much more refined and thoughtful, and we have really come to a point where we're taking consideration of sustainability and you know, just the care of what we put on a plate. Is it having an impact on you know, the future generations to come? So I think that in that regard, yeah, sorry, I'm sort of deviating, but as far as that relates to my past, there was an awkward phase of my past where I really had no direction, and I felt, you know, that, and I probably didn't have a lot of real mentors of hospitality in my life to sort of raise me up. It was only probably 6 years ago when I actually made the move to the Kimberley region, where I felt like I'd found myself as a chef, and I was happy for people to call me chef because I felt like I'd just developed to that next level.
You found your voice. No, I feel you on that. Like, it took me probably like 10, 11 years in the culinary field before I feel like I found my voice, because there was definitely that time where it was like, all right, well, what's popular right now? What am I going to put on my menus? And you kind of like cater to what's going on. And then eventually you're just like, I hate all of this. I just want to make food that I like, and then attract the people who also think that what I'm doing is cool. And I think that's like a very pivotal point in the life of a chef, like the career trajectory in general. So it's cool to hear that you've found your voice.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think I sort of during the past, I sort of feel like I wouldn't be where I am if I didn't have that sort of side of my career, where I, you know, was just bumbling through and struggling and sort of trying to learn off my own back, and, you know, seeing all the, you know, the amazing chefs out there that, you know, had an influence externally to me, but feeling like I could never sort of reach that kind of point. And I'm still, you know, I'll never stop learning and never stop growing. You know, that's the death of a chef, is when they think they've made it.
Oh, I think it was Fernand Point that says it, like, in cooking as in life, you're a student your entire life, or something like that. There's like a very famous quote by him, but it's like, you are literally never done learning. And if you think you are, that's how you know that you should just move on to something else, because you've taken what you're going to take and there's no room for you to go. And honestly, I think growing is the most fun part of being a chef, because there's so much to learn. And
Yeah.
for me personally, it's like I love traveling because I get to discover, like, every time I go there, it's like I'm opening my world to an entirely new pantry. And it's like, just when I think
Yeah.
I've mastered all of these ingredients, it's like, all right, what the hell is this? Like, I've never seen this before. And then you get to learn all about the history and how it became popular. And, it's just, there's so many different ways to acquire knowledge in this industry. And I think it can keep you a forever student if you let it.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And I think the fact of post-COVID travel around the world and being able to kind of have, the world is growing smaller as far as the accessibility for us to be able to use new ingredients, and new ingredients are still being found, and the flavors that are being put together are, I think, becoming more accessible in today's age than they ever have been. So I think it's that sort of leads to being able to keep on learning and keep on growing as a chef.
Awesome. So in your tenure of cooking, what's been the most difficult the most difficult challenge that you've faced in your career so far?
Look, I think definitely the mental side of being a chef, and how that plays a part in your growth as a chef, your mental status, and always being having to keep in check where you're at, because the hospitality industry is so full on, and it just never stops, that if you don't sort of stop yourself and take stock, I feel like you can easily get swallowed. And I had some
Oh,
times as a chef where, I didn't realize it, but I was probably clinically depressed just with, not seeing family, missing out on birthdays, Christmases, everything like that. It's, you're told, it's drilled into you that from a young age that that's just a part of hospitality. That's what you have to do. But nobody sort of really teaches you how to get through it and, become, aware of things before it gets too late. And that's when, chefs do sort of get to a point of possibly, struggling with alcoholism, drug dependency, depression, using things to try and mask the pain of sort of just being involved in an industry that is like it is.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that. And I think that's way more common than people realize. And it's just like the industry tells you that it's like this unwritten law in the industry where it's like, if you don't work 100 hours a week, you're not good enough and you will never make it as a chef. And it's like, you
Yes.
are a hack, you are, subhuman if you don't do this. And so I think a lot of people take on that mindset of like, oh, I have to do this, otherwise no one will respect me. But then like they forget to respect themselves in the process because they're so worried about
Yeah.
gaining the respect of their peers and the people in their industry. And it just like, it spirals out of control so easily. And I know like I've seen it hundreds of times in my career. Like I've known so many people who have just like, you think that they're at the top of their game,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden you hear about they committed suicide and you're like, what the
Yeah.
hell?
Shock.
And it's
How
like
did
they
that
just
happen?
reached that breaking point and you're just like, how do we get this far? Like, how do we allow this to happen in our industry?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is it's an amazing subject that I think needs to be talked about more. But I've sort of gone into sort of depth about this subject with a few people. I actually posted it the other week on my socials, a photo of myself, and I said along the lines of, how do you think COVID has changed the mentality of chefs and their working hours? And we basically had a whole industry of people that have worked so solidly from 70 to sort of 90 hours a week, or even if it's less, it's still a lot of time spent, to all of a sudden, in the space of no time, stopping and not doing anything. The shutdowns has had a huge impact on the mentality of the chef. And so I put this post up and I said, how has COVID changed your view on hospitality, and the time spent that just say you work 70 hours a week and get paid for 40 as a salary staff member. How has this changed your perception on, life versus working in the kitchen? And it ended up getting 110,000 views, and like I woke up and there was 480 comments on my phone, and I'm like, whoa, wait, hang on a second, and
That's how we
everybody
found
was
you.
just, yeah, it just blew up, and I was just like, wow, this is such an important issue, and everyone was saying, it's changed my mind. It's, I'm now thinking about life as life's too short to be doing this, and then the whole being paid what we're worth. We need to hold a bit of honor about actually being paid for what we're worth. And I think that a lot of chefs really have a lack of self-worth because they think that they're not worth enough if they're not working 90 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, hang on a sec, you've spent 4 years of your life to basically do the grind to get a trade that is a trade as a qualification. It's a skill. And if you're in any other industry, like a plumber or a carpenter or, anything like that, if you work out overtime, you get paid for that because you're worth it. So where did this mentality come from that free working and working above the hours that you're actually paid to do is honorable? It's not. It's lacking your self-worth as a chef.
No, I totally agree. And it's like, there's a post we wrote like a month or two ago called Kitchen Hypnosis. And it basically talks about the mindset of how the industry kind of like breaks you down systematically over a period of time and convinces you that you're not good enough. And you're never good enough in the restaurant industry, And I think that does a lot more harm to people than anybody really wants to talk about. And I know there's going to be people that watch this and they'll be like, oh, a bunch of snowflakes bitching about the industry. It's like, no, we're just standing up for like basic human rights, basic decency, treatment, fair pay, like things that every other industry seems to have except ours. But we think that just because that's the way it's always been, that means that's the way it always has to be. But it's not, like it's not at all. The only reason it's going to be like this in the future is if we allow it to be like this in the future.
Exactly.
And so what we're really interested in is promoting an example of how it could not be like that, Like what does that look like? What do boundaries look like? What does work-life balance look like? How do you talk to your employers about getting a time, like a day off every now and then? I know that's like sacrilege to say, but like it's doing a lot of good for people in this time to have some time to clear your head, to think. And I know a couple of years ago, I went through my own unintentional lockdown where my life kind of fell apart, and like everything that could go wrong went wrong in a span of 6 weeks. And that culminated with like a car accident right before New Year's Eve. And then I had to like quit the job that I had. And so for the first time in 15 years, I found myself with no car and no job to get to and literally nothing to do. And I lost my mind for like a week and a half. I was like, what am I going to do? I like don't know how to not be busy. And it ended up being the best thing to ever happen to me because it allowed me to actually have the time and the space to look in my head and fix the problems that I was ignoring because I didn't have the time, And now, ironically, since I did that, my life is kind of unfolded in a completely different direction. And it's no longer like, oh, how do I make the time for that? It's like, it's very easy for me to like schedule my life now because I understand where my priorities are. And I understand the effect of what not honoring those priorities will actually do in my life. And so I hope that that's like what's happening right now with a lot of people. I know there's a lot of people that are struggling and they're feeling purposeless and lost and struggling with their addictions coming back because they just don't have anything else to do, or
well, like the old saying goes, the idle hands of the devil's playground.
Yeah, absolutely.
I did read a study a couple of months back before COVID about some very affluent restaurants in Scandinavia, sort of like Finland and Sweden. And what they're actually doing was that they were implementing 4-day working week for restaurant chefs. And what they were finding is that they were getting more productivity out of the chef. The chefs were in a fresher mood. They gave them 3 days off in a row and still paid them the same. I don't know how it's going to work, but basically they were finding that the mental health of the chef was more on board with the vision, and the productivity was up. So, you know, I believe in hard work and hard graft, and I've done, over 20 years of that myself. I'm no stranger to, doing the 75-hour week and grinning and bearing it. But by the time it gets to the end of, say, 3 months of doing that, 4 months to 2 years or whatever, you are a tired mess. We're not, the sustainability, and I think this is the big thing, is that how can we sustain a culture in an industry where there is no future keeping of these chefs, where we use them up and burn them out until they're done, and then the young ones come in and do the next lot. It's like, no, the average lifespan, not lifespan, but career span of a chef has gone down from 30 years down to 17 years.
Wow.
In the last 10 years.
That's crazy.
It's like, it's crazy. And why is that happening? It's like, I think there is a little bit of an awakening, and I think that there's, like you said, there's still those hardcore chefs out there that will go, oh, you snowflakes, just get up and do it. But like you said, does it have to be like that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like the fact that we even have to justify the fact of like, oh, well, I've done those 80, 90-hour work weeks. It's like, it's crazy to me now to think about that.
I still, it's in the head.
It's totally
I still
in
feel
your
like
head.
I have to justify it.
It's like, because if you don't, there's going to be somebody that's like, oh, you're not a real chef. It's like, shut up, get a life. Like, literally get a life. Like, it will do you so much good to find hobbies outside of the culinary industry. And like, not only for your physical health, but for your mental health as well, because it gives you a chance to disengage from work. And I think that's something that a lot of chefs have a hard time doing, is like mentally disengaging from work. You have nightmares about the ticket printer when you're in your sleep after a long work week. And it's like,
absolutely.
For years, I could not turn it off. And, it's like my only friends were industry people. My only relationships were people in the industry. And like, that's literally never a good idea. And, it's like,
that's dangerous.
And it's like, you just get in this little bubble and you kind of forget what the rest of the world is like. You forget what living is actually like, because you just exist in this low level state of anxiety for so long that you think that that's how life is. And it's like, it's not. It's so not like that.
No, exactly. I sort of see that we need to be doing what we're doing now, and just like, I think the more exposure we kind of do by talking about it, it sort of just gets the seed planted in people's minds about, the worth of a chef, and the way that we sort of conduct our life, is all dependent on how we can have an influence in changing that mindset.
Absolutely. I think the money conversation is a big one too. Like I've been self-employed for about 7 years now. I started a business back in 2013. And it's like, it's crazy because it's taken me so long to raise my rates enough to actually get paid what I'm worth. Because when I first started, I was like, oh, I don't want to charge that much, because it's like, I don't, do I deserve that? And it took me like years before I was actually like making enough money with the parties that I was doing and the clients that I was having, before I was making industry standard rates. Because there's this like the self-worth thing with money. It's like, you don't deserve to get paid what a normal professional with 15 years of hospitality experience in their experience in their industry would be getting paid. And so even now I'm just like, am I charging too much? I'm like, no, I'm not. I deserve this. I've been doing this for a long time. I know what I'm doing.
I had the exact same conversation with my business partner the other day. We were talking about the exact fact of how, because during COVID, we ended up, I lost my job, or I got stood down. And so my friend and myself, we said, hey, look, the restaurants are shut. Let's start a business. So we're like, during COVID, no worries. And then we were able to have parties of up to 10 people in our houses. And so we just said, hey, look, let's start a business. So we started a business called the Butler and the Chef, and we go around to people's houses and do these like fine dining sort of set menus and degustations and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, wow, like this is amazing. And we're like doing up the quote, and I'm like, we can't charge that. That's
Nobody's gonna pay that.
And he's like, no, do it. He's like fine with it. So we put the quote out, we got it accepted, and now I'm starting to feel the worth of what we're actually doing is, we're actually doing something that people are appreciating, and they're not faced with the cost that we're charging because they know that we're worth it.
Right. It's also, I think it helps. One thing that helped me a lot was to reframe my relationship to money in general, and seeing it as like, just like, oh, I'm getting paid per hour. It's like, no, I'm being paid for the value that I am adding to this person's either day or event or whatever. It's money is an energetic exchange between the people. If they're getting something from you, you should be getting something from them as well, because you're putting
exactly right.
And it's like, you're not just doing 4 hours of on-site preparation and execution.
No.
You're doing like a week's worth of planning and emailing and prepping and shopping. And that was like, when I first started, I was like, oh, I guess I'll give myself like $200 for this. And then I ended up working like 35 hours for it. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work. So
that's not going to work.
Revise this one a little bit. But yeah, it's like,
exactly.
And also like getting to the point where you turn down clients was a pivotal step in my own career, where it's just like, they will, they haggle you on, for instance, like your hazard pay. If you're doing hazard pay right now and they try and haggle or negotiate that, it's like, no, sorry, I'm just not going to take you on as a client. And like setting those boundaries where you stay true to yourself, and
exactly.
you just like don't backslide back into your like learned restaurant habits again.
I suppose this sort of brings on to the question that I've had is, so for people like you and me who have made the step to start working for ourselves, how can we sort of have an influence on the chefs that are in the industry where they're a part of a corporation or a business that dictate how much they get paid?
That's a really important conversation, because I don't have too much experience in the corporate world, like a little bit, but not to the level of like making it a life path or anything. So I think it's just gotta be like, as an industry, we have to stop accepting the low wages. I think we just have to stop taking the jobs that pay, $7 an hour, minimum wage, but it's probably a little higher in Australia than it is in the United States, but but I know here it's like a huge problem. It's like you're doing hard labor for minimum wage, even though you have, like, in a lot of times, diplomas or certifications or really good qualifications that in literally any other industry would be getting you like a quality of life wage. And in the restaurant industry, it's like, I guess we'll give you, $1 or $2 more than we pay somebody who's just started out. And it's like, wow, great. I feel so valued.
Exactly. I see that, the hospitality industry in general, they the services that they charge for, say, a plate of food is one of the only industries that hasn't sort of inflated to the degree where other industries have. So if another industry had a rate rise or had to pay more, then they put the price of their product up. Whereas, I see that almost like food has got so much competition that the prices come down. And then how are you supposed to be able to like move pay the profits forward if there's no profits to be made? And I don't think that the community in general, will accept, a plate rise of $5 per plate for something, especially in this climate.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. I know I've heard a lot of things from restaurants, like just seen articles about restaurants just increasing their prices a little bit due to, shortages of ingredients. And I know in the United States, there was like the meat processing plants were shut, like a couple of them were shut down, and there was like supply chain issues. And then as a result, the products were more expensive. And then the consumers just totally freaked out, like no understanding whatsoever. They're like, oh, my pork loin shouldn't be $19. It was $17 last week. And it's like, it's just the market, you can't get around that. It's like if people continue to demand cheap food products, it's going to be a cycle of toxicity all around. I know my partner's family is in agriculture, and it's like they're forced to just pay, cut corners so far and not have the level of quality that they want to be competitive in that industry. It's because nobody's going to pay more than like a couple cents for raw product.
Yeah.
And it's like we expect people to be miracle workers when it comes to our food.
Yeah, oh, exactly. And I just sort of see it's the sign of the times that, another big issue for me is sustainability of how we're eating as humanity. Can we keep up the demand for the supply of the food that we're actually producing?
Absolutely.
And how is that going to affect the the future of restaurant industry? It's all going to make a huge difference if we don't sort of change the way that we possibly eat. And before too long, we're probably going to see some of that impact.
Absolutely. One thing I've been hugely advocating for, in especially my local community, is eating local and like supporting the small farmers and not dealing with the products that are shipped halfway around the globe. Not getting your beef from Brazil when you live in the United States, or like for you guys, like just eating, like shopping from the areas that produce food locally to strengthen the local economy. Because as chefs, we really do have a lot more influence than I think a lot of people realize. We're major purchasers. We are major purchasers when it comes to food products in general. And so if we are the voice of that sustainability and we use our platforms to educate our client base and like, this is like, break it down for them. Like, this is why your plate charge has gone up, because we are trying to support our local community from the bottom up instead of the top down, because that literally never works.
No, exactly. I'm actually writing, in the middle of writing a book at the moment, and one of the chapters is about the food sustainability and the future of food production. And I sort of stated in there that I believe that in the restaurant industry, we are actually at the top of the discussion, or we almost dictate how fashions then go down for food. So if we start, doing something within the restaurant industry, people then take that back home. They start cooking that stuff at home, and then it just sort of flows all the way down to the bottom. And I think that we don't realize how much influence that we do actually have on food trends. And so if we as chefs kind of, start making a bit of a change in the way that we do food in restaurants, then it will flow down to the general population.
Absolutely. And I think one of the craziest things for me in my career is when I made the shift to use better products. Because at first, like when I first started out, I was just happy to have a client in general,
Yeah.
I think that's like a pretty common thing. It's like, oh my God, somebody's paying me to cook for them. Sweet. And you try and make it like, you try and price yourself as competitively as possible at first. And then I started to kind of, as I developed my voice and found my voice with food, I wanted to incorporate that sustainability and more like organic and nutritious foods into the food that I was making. And I started using better quality ingredients and highlighting that on my menus, on my social medias, educating people about why the ingredients that I'm using are special, why they're intentionally chosen to be in the dish that I've put them in. And when I did that, raising my rates was no problem whatsoever, because people understand why. And so I think there's an element of education that we need to do as well, just to kind of help people wrap their heads around the idea of, spending more than 5% of their monthly income on food,
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, what is it? France, I think, is the highest purchaser, like France spends the most on food out of any industrialized nation.
Really?
It's like
Wow.
40% of their income is food based. in the United States, it's like 70% of it is just housing and existing. So
Yeah. That's insane. Well, that shows their biggest focus has always been around sort of food, and I think that's that I didn't realize that stat was that high.
yeah, it's something, I mean, don't quote me on that. I'll definitely research that later, but it's something, it's a lot higher than anywhere else. And like
Yeah,
French culture dictates that like food is a super important part of life. And so they
yeah,
don't mind paying more for having less food. And I think that's
yeah.
also like something that the United States could really take a few pointers from.
Yeah, look, I think Australia definitely kind of follows quite a long way behind, but definitely the trends do come directed from the US, and I see that the sort of portion sizes of food that we're producing are sort of growing, and it's like, no, we need to cut them back, but use better products, and
Yeah.
you probably pay the same amount, but you you're actually getting quality instead of more than we actually need.
Right, right. It's gluttonous. And like there are some people who are excited to take home leftovers, but like the majority of people who take home leftovers never eat them, you know?
No,
It's like
exactly.
you're like, oh great, I got 2 plates of food out of this, and then one of them goes into the trash. And it's like it's so
Yeah,
wasteful. And also like I don't know if you've ever worked in catering, but the waste in catering is like enough to make you sick. Like there were times
yeah.
where it's just like you see like whole beef tenderloins going into the garbage, and it's like, what the hell?
That's
Like,
insane.
yeah, it's
I
crazy.
saw
And
a documentary on Netflix the other day, and it was about the buffets in Las Vegas, where how they're
oh my
actually
god,
looking at getting rid of them because there was just truckloads and truckloads of waste just going to the
yeah.
pigs, and the pigs were eating the waste. But
Hmm.
I couldn't. It just mind boggled me how much food was being lost.
It's really disgusting. Yeah, it's like one reason why I decided to start my own sort of events and personal chefing company is because the waste just made me sick. And like there were times where I would literally just pack up tins and take them to like a local women's shelter, or when I
Yeah.
was living in Los Angeles I would pack up like the to-go tins, or I'd bring in Ziploc baggies and I just put in like a ton of them, and then I just take them down to Skid Row and I just like hand them out to people who are like sleeping on a bus stop or something and just give them
Wow.
dinner for the night. And it's like people are terrified to do that because at least in the US everybody's scared to get sued because somebody gets sick off of
Oh,
food, which is
yeah.
ridiculous. Because like I don't know if a lot of people know this. I definitely want to get this message out. If you live in the United States, it's not illegal to donate food. There's a law passed in 1993 by Bill Clinton called the Good Samaritan Act that says
Yeah.
that
I've heard of it.
if you donate food in good faith with good intentions, and you do not, it's, you know, somebody ends up getting sick from it, you are not able to be held liable by that person. So it's
Yeah.
basically like if you donate food, you're not going to go to jail or lose your business license or have your whole life turned around because somebody got, you know,
Got
salmonella
sick from
because,
something that you gave
yeah,
them. Yeah.
exactly. So I think the more people know about that, I think there's also like a huge opportunity for people to reduce waste in cooking as well. And like for like if there was a company that had like catering companies could call up to take their food donations that would
Yeah.
repurpose it, and you know it would just be like amazing if somebody would take the initiative on that. And
Yeah, absolutely. Or
instead of,
just cutting the head off the snake of like stopping this exorbitant waste of food in the first place,
absolutely.
like with
uh,
the massive buffets and everything. And
oh my god, it's honestly like the first time I went to Las Vegas, because I live in California, and I've worked a lot. I've worked in music festivals for a long time, and
yeah,
some of the biggest ones are in Las Vegas, and like that is unbelievable, the amount of food that gets pushed through those like buffets, and you get lost in the casinos there. It's like a labyrinth, and it takes you 4 hours to find your hotel room at the end of the day, and it's yeah, it's another universe entirely.
yeah,
but yeah, that idea of taking only what you need and not having that excess, because it's unnecessary at this point.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, we do a 6-course degustation at people's houses, and we buy what we need, we prepare that food, the plates come back clean, and we go home with maybe 2 little tubs with leftover of something that we, didn't quite need on the plate. And it's like, wow, this
some
is
sauce or some garnish. Yeah,
exactly.
Dude, it's always
So
satisfying too when you come back with like no leftovers and you're like, yes, I killed it today.
nailed it. Exactly.
That's
But
awesome.
no, look, I'm absolutely loving sort of the direction that we've taken, as far as sort of stepping out from the rat race. And we have an opportunity now to sort of dictate where we go, and have a lot more freedom to sort of do the food that we want to do. And I'm absolutely loving it. But I think that the big questions need to happen to the chefs that are doing the grind still
Absolutely.
in restaurants.
And I think
And
conversations like this are just more about showing people that it's possible to step out of that. Like, I know when I was working in fine dining, especially when I was in like Michelin star kitchens, there's this mentality that like, oh, you're not a real chef if you work in catering. You're not a real chef if you work in a hotel. It's like the only real chefs are the ones that work in fine dining. And it's like,
yeah,
it's ridiculous because there's so many different directions that you can take your career as somebody who cooks professionally. And I think just showing that it's possible to, step out of the narrowly limited box that the industry kind of shows you of like, this is what your career is going to be like. And just like, no,
yeah.
it
Oh,
can go in
absolutely.
100 different directions.
Yeah, and I've almost felt sometimes I've had more freedom and creativity in a cafe that I'm sort of heading up than I've had in some of the bigger restaurants that
Mm-hmm.
have all their stuff set. They've got 15 chefs in the kitchen, and you go like that on the plate, or
Yeah,
it's sort of like it's totally up to the direction that you want to take. And I think that the mentality shift of not sort of looking down on the people that are maybe not in a fine dining, but they're not in a pub, not in a restaurant, and not in a cafe. We're all in the same industry. We're all
absolutely.
driving towards the one goal, and that's making people happy through food.
Absolutely. What trends have you noticed since the lockdown started in March?
Okay, so I think one thing in particular, which is I believe going to continue making a big impact even after COVID sort of subsides eventually, is takeaway. The takeaway revolution is not going to stop.
Absolutely.
A lot of restaurants and cafes really kind of diversified during COVID, and the ones that were able to still trade ended up doing more takeaway than they've ever done in their life. And what they ended up finding from a lot of the places that I've spoken to is that they were able to possibly even sell more food than they did before. They had less staff on, and they made more money. So it's
So
like,
crazy.
yeah. And even though in Western Australia, where I live, we have got only one case of COVID-19 now, and
Wow.
it's crazy. Like we did so well through it. They shut all our borders. We did there was probably about 4 weeks of actual lockdown where it was only going to essential services or anything like that. And then they released their restrictions, and we came out of it so well. Yes, we are very isolated, but everyone was very good with social distancing, everything like that. The supermarkets, 1.5 meters. It was actually really well done. But through that, I think coming back to the takeaway revolution, that's something that I think will very much continue to happen even after.
Absolutely. And I think it's actually pretty cool how some restaurants have been adapting and seeing
Yeah,
like, how do we replicate our in-house dining experience in somebody else's home without our
yeah,
chefs to put everything out at the exact moment when everything is perfectly cooked and fresh out of the fryer. Like, it's just a new
yeah,
set of challenges, And it's like,
exactly.
one of my favorite quotes is like, we can't change the cards that we're dealt, but we can change the way we play the hand. And right now it's like the
Exactly.
world just got dealt like a really shit deck,
Yeah,
But it's like,
absolutely.
how do you take what you've been dealt and turn it into something that you're proud of, that you're
Yeah.
excited by, and that's profitable and engaging as well. Because I think like there's a lot of people who just like think that takeaway has to be just, you know, turkey wraps and potato chips and, you know, like really
Exactly.
boring foods. But it's like, how do you turn your takeaway into an experience that people are going to be talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other side of things that is really making an impact, especially in Australia at the moment, is the ready-to-home meals. A lot of restaurants are actually
Oh, yeah.
preparing the base ingredients of meals and send it with a list of instructions in a box and then send it to your house so that people have an opportunity to make pretty well the same sort of quality as what you're getting in the restaurants, but you're doing it yourself in home.
Right. That's great. That's an amazing idea, especially because
Yeah.
then it's like that also is helping people with their confidence in cooking as well.
Yeah,
You know, because
absolutely.
if you don't have to do all of the chopping yourself, I think that's something that a lot of like people at home who don't cook for a living, they just see as
Yeah.
like a huge hindrance, is like, oh, I just have to do so much prep work. I have to do all of this like other stuff to get the one meal on the plate, you know? But if you
Exactly.
give people everything that they need, all of their mise en place ready to go, and
Yeah,
then you just tell them what order to put the ingredients in the pan, then they feel really accomplished. And they,
yeah,
you know, it's really hard to mess up in a lot of ways, you know?
yeah.
And so it
It's
just like,
just
it creates more of a connection with food. And it also teaches people like how much work actually goes into making the meal that they're eating. So I think it
exactly.
might give more of an appreciation for food as well, which will make our lives as cooks like a lot easier in the future.
Exactly. Yeah. I totally agree with that. That's definitely a good positive, having the ability for people in their houses to actually appreciate, because some people just don't cook at all, and that's fine. That keeps
Mhm.
us in a job.
Right.
But then for the people that do, life is getting so much busier these days that, the ability for taking that half of the meal prep and the worry and everything like that, I think it's a good thing.
That's awesome. It also gives you a
Another
chance
thing,
to like highlight other, you know, to highlight the local purveyors. Like we were talking about sustainability and shopping local
yeah,
earlier. It's like it gives people an opportunity to actually get to know who the farmers are by putting it directly on the menu card or on the instructions, and like, you know,
yes,
highlighting those businesses as you're putting the takeaway out. And then it's like you just create this cycle of like helping each other out, raising up all of the other businesses, all the other makers in the community, and just kind of like reinstilling that knowledge in your local community.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. Which leads on to the third thing I think I've definitely seen a big change in is the buying local. I think the locally sourced and buying local, and I think it's genuinely because of COVID, has made that mental transition shift, because people are thinking a lot more insular and thinking about their communities and thinking about, it's made everybody's mind shift inwards to their community. That's basically it. So
Absolutely.
I've seen a lot more of that.
What do you think is one habit that cooks and chefs and restaurant folks in general could adopt right now that would exponentially increase their quality of life?
Oh, that's a hard one, because I find that the mindset of a chef is quite stubborn. So it's really hard to try and say there's one thing that will change. It's like the magic blue pill that you just kind of.
I guess we could change that to like, is there something in your own life that has really shifted your own mindset, like something that's helped you in a very positive way?
Oh, absolutely. I think for a long time I never talked about issues with people. I think that we're coming into a day and age where it's a lot more widely accepted to actually talk about life issues, and especially with from chef to chef. So if you're working in a kitchen with other chefs, then you can have that kind of insular kind of mindset, but being able to just say, hey, look, I'm really struggling with this, can you help me, has absolutely changed my life to a point where I've now accepted that if I'm in a team with other chefs, I always ask them, I said, hey, how are you going? Are you okay? And
Yeah.
it's not it's just that it's two words, like 3 words. Are you okay? But I've made, I felt like I've actually made a difference to a few people that I've said, actually, no, I'm not. I'm really struggling. And then we go, okay, no worries. Let's go, have a drink and, chat about it. And
I think that whole like seeing your coworkers or your employees as humans is a big thing that could really help a lot of people in a lot of very big ways. I know the only way that I was able to actually implement that in my own life was to first see myself as a human,
Yes.
and give yourself that compassion, that attention, that level of understanding where you're like, hey, it's okay that I'm struggling right now. It's totally understandable that I'm struggling. Like, this shit is really hard. And giving yourself that compassion makes it a lot easier to give it to other people, because I know there's the one thing that I think is fairly pervasive in the industry, no matter where you are in the world, is that cooks are really not treated like humans. They're treated like workers. They're treated like objects. And it's like, when the object doesn't show up to do the job, then the whip gets cracked and everybody, like, all hell breaks loose. And it's like, it shouldn't be like that. Like, your cooks are people. They have lives. They have issues that they're dealing with outside of work. And I think there should be a level of leniency that we just see each other as humans that are flawed, that sometimes, like, we don't have our shit together, and that's totally fine, but it's not going to be like that forever. And if you address it when it comes up, it's going to make it so much easier in the long run for
Absolutely.
everyone.
I sort of likened the chefing industry to the band of misfits, and I really feel like, as that sort of, the army boys that come together, that are from all walks of life, that we're in the trench together. And I think that almost viewing it as sort of your work family. You when it's family, you look after each other more. So you have to make sure that everyone is on the same page, and if someone's down, you pick them up. That's the mentality that really need to have.
Absolutely. And I think there's like this, everybody says restaurant family, but very few actually implement that.
Yes.
Like, they call the restaurant, oh, it's like my restaurant family, but they don't actually treat each other like family. So it's like, if we're going to call each other family, let's collectively start acting like it. Let's give a shit when somebody says they're struggling, instead of telling them to, like, oh, suck it up, buttercup. Like, no, just have a human conversation with the person. If you could tell that they're not okay, and step out of your ego enough to, like, see somebody else as a human being. And I think that would be a super powerful shift that the industry could make.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, definitely agree.
What do you think are some of the biggest barriers to actually implementing some, like, more positive changes, like mindset and working conditions and pay and et cetera?
I think the barriers that we come across is definitely probably the pay aspects. I think that I don't actually think that the pay in sort of Australia is that bad. I'm going to get some flack for that, but like, on par with other industries. Yeah, look, if you're on casual getting paid a wage, it is actually quite on par. The times that I think the barriers are when you go into salary, and then you're paid for 38 hours a week. And then that's when it kicks in, especially for the more senior staff, and then it splits into two sections. So I believe that the employers do tend to have a bit of a, well, you're on salary, so, we need this, and this done. But then the other side is the chef's mind going, I'm not worth it if I don't do that much. And because I don't have any like hour restrictions, I'm just going to keep on working. And that side of things, the people pleasing, absolutely. And it comes to the fact that you're not good enough because you're not working your ass off, and it's almost like you wear it as a badge on your shoulder, on your chest, that really means nothing.
Right. And I think one way that I've started to deal with this in my own life is stipulating this in my initial contract with people, is like saying, like, okay, here's my rate for this many hours. If it goes beyond these amount of hours, I will be paid X amount extra. and just kind of like asserting that boundary from the very beginning so that everybody knows where you stand, and actually holding yourself accountable and following through with it. I know I had like a really difficult client last year where she was just asking me to stay like so much, and she was not paying me. And I'm like, okay, so I'm just not going to show up until you pay me, because this is not how this works, Like, if you're going to be an example, you have to kind of like walk the talk and actually follow through with the promises that you make to yourself.
Yeah,
which I think
100%.
is a really big thing, especially if you go into the world of being self-employed. But anyway, like even in restaurants, even if you're working at somebody else's restaurants, like respect yourself and then other people will respect you. But if you continually disrespect yourself, then people are going to walk all over you. You're going to get stuck in these toxic jobs with these toxic bosses, and your cycle will continue until you choose to break it for yourself.
Yeah, 100%. I felt that in myself quite a few years ago, where I didn't like people calling me chef. And, I was in the kitchen and I'd be like, oh, my name's Luke, not chef. And I think in myself, like it was me not giving myself the respect that I had earned. And I just got an epiphany one day and I went, no, I actually do value myself, and I do value the time I've put into being a chef. So I said to everybody, okay, everybody, like now it's time you call me chef. And then within that sort of period, it was amazing just to see the level of respect that everybody sort of gave me without me doing anything. But it was just that mindset change.
Absolutely. No, mindset I think is so huge, because a chef isn't something that you do, it's something that you become over time. And it's like, you don't just like magically get a hat and a coat and you're like, I'm a chef now. It's like, no, you don't become a chef until you feel like you're a chef. And I think that's something that like,
it's so funny because it was just that change in my head. I just went, oh, actually, I do deserve it.
Like, I'm doing all of the things that a chef does. I guess maybe I can call myself a chef now.
Yeah. And I always see these debates on social media about, God, who is a chef and who's a cook and blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, oh my God, guys, seriously. Like,
get a life.
Yeah, there's more difficult things to be debating about, but it obviously shows that it is an issue. People feel like, that this is a big thing. Is that who makes a chef? And, is it because of your, over here we do an apprenticeship for 4 years and you go to TAFE or a learning school and you do, your modules and then you get a certificate at the end. And I think that sort of dictates on paper here what it means to be a chef and what it means to be a cook. But at the end of the day, I think, I think it was, who was it? Marcus Waring, possibly. He said that at the end of the day, we're all cooks. Yeah. We cook food.
Exactly.
Like, don't get stuck with the whole mentality of, what it makes to be a chef, because it can become quite arrogant.
Sometimes being a chef downright sucks because you stop cooking and just do paperwork forever. And so like chasing that title, I think, is something that not many people realize, like, sometimes ends in a lot of disappointment when you finally get there.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So what do you think, so if you look at your own career, like what's the biggest lesson that working in the restaurant and hospitality industry has taught you?
The biggest lesson I've learned in hospitality, I think that sort of comes down to, I think being kind to myself is one of the biggest lessons I've had to learn, and don't take the weight of the world on my shoulders. It's very easy, especially more in the earlier days of, the work and the grind and sort of trying to make a career for yourself. I found that I let it get on top of me, and I feel like sort of trying to live up to the Joneses and, trying to be the best that I can. I just got to a point where I said, no, I'm just going to be myself, and I'm just going to work to my means, keep on learning, but don't take the weight of the world on your shoulders, because you're only going to, get yourself stuff up in your head,
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's awesome. And one thing you were saying about like just being yourself, and it's like one of those weird realizations that I had that kind of like annoyed the shit out of me when I had it was, was that it was like when you try to please other people, it comes across like people can tell, but when
Yeah.
you're just doing something for you, that's when you start to attract people who actually get what you're doing, and then they start to think it's
Yes.
cool. But if you're doing things to try and like show people that this is cool, like it's never going to work out. It's not, it
No.
doesn't like you might get
Oh,
your 15
exactly.
minutes of fame, but you'll crash and burn so fast.
Yeah, exactly. Look, I think it was when I realized that point that I just didn't have to try and people please. Is that it was quite a big moment. I just went, okay, and then from that I ended up feeling like so free to actually do what I want, and I wasn't afraid of what people thought of me. So I started up the social media stuff. I branded myself as the everyday chef, and I started writing a book and started putting myself out there on social media because I wasn't afraid of what people would think.
Mm-hmm.
It's just I ended up exploding just on my own self-worth and exploration that I wouldn't have ever thought about it before that time.
You become a lot more authentic when you do that.
Yeah, and I even started doing videos on these issues. I did a bit of a series on um, what it means to be a chef, the problems with alcoholism and chefing, and then one on a couple of other issues. And I was like, because it's very not like me to put myself out there and be on video and stuff like
Dude,
that.
it's terrifying at first, like
Yes,
straight up
terrifying. But
terrifying.
I'm sitting there for like 10 hours editing a video of myself going, what am I doing? And then I push the send button and it's just like, what the hell? And but then the feedback that comes back is like, yeah, right. You're on the right page. It's a very liberating thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I know like this year in particular for my career has been like huge. Just because I was on a Netflix show a couple months ago, and it's
I
about
saw
like
it.
cooking with cannabis, and it's like
Yeah.
the episode theme was like the future of food, and they were expecting molecular gastronomy, and I did
Yeah.
not go in that direction whatsoever, because to me, like thinking about how I'm seeing the trends, what I'm seeing in the industry and the food industry in general, like that's 10 years ago,
Yeah.
and so I went in like a completely different direction, and like it was very unexpected, but it ended up totally working in my favor. And the people that have reached out to me since then are all exactly the kind of people that I want to be talking to. It's like they
Exactly.
saw me for me, and I don't have to pretend. Like everybody knows like I'm kind of a nut, and like that's cool. Like that's me. I
That's
don't have to
awesome.
like wear that mask anymore, and it's so liberating to kind of just break out of the box that you've put yourself in, the identity
Yeah.
box.
Oh,
It's like
absolutely. And
the things that
it's
we're
through.
the most terrified of are the things that actually end up being the most beneficial to our life in general.
Absolutely, and that is this sort of direction that I've gone on that put me in front of you today, because I
Yeah.
wouldn't have had the guts to be able to just push the button and put that photo of myself out there.
Yeah,
And it's amazing the sort of the opportunities that open up when you actually do put yourself out there.
absolutely. Yeah. And it's like you always like fear the worst. I think that's the cook mindset, is like when you're in restaurants, especially, this is something I've been thinking a lot about. You're kind of systematically trained to look for what's wrong over
Yes.
and over and over again. And you don't realize like you have to find ways of turning that off when you're not in the kitchen, because if you don't turn that off, it will mess up your life. Like got
Yeah.
myself there, but it will definitely take you down a rabbit hole of negativity that will be nearly impossible to get out of. And it's like that's where I found myself a couple of years ago, is just always looking for what was wrong and never even recognizing the things that were right, the things that were good in my life. And it's like I didn't just look for it in the kitchen, I looked for it in the people that I was dating, or my friends that I had, or the social circle that I was in, or my my life in general, I just always looked for what was wrong. And it's like, it's this crazy, like, you don't realize when it's happening, but then all of a sudden you find yourself in it and you're like, oh God, there's nothing good in the world. It's like, no, you just literally forgotten how to actually see the things that are good. Yeah.
Exactly. No, that's really good.
All right. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up because we're hitting right around the hour mark here, and I don't want to keep people for too long. But if you could travel back in time and sit down and have a conversation with your 14-year-old self right before you got into restaurants, what advice would you give yourself, or would you give to anyone else?
Run away. No. Yeah, look, just I would tell myself it'll be all right, just to keep on trucking, because there is light at the end of the tunnel.
That's great.
It's that simple. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. It's just,
it really does. Like, as bad as it seems right now, like, it's not going to be like it forever. Like, you will get out of whatever situation that you're in. And I think that's super important to just continually remind people of. So thank you for sharing that.
No, that's okay. It's all good.
Do you have any social media that you'd like to plug?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to check us out, my Instagram and Facebook is under Luke Sutherland, or Chef Sutherland on Instagram. That's SUTHERLAND. And I'm classed as the Everyday Chef. And then the business that we've got is called the Butler and the Chef. So if you look us up on the socials as well. So no, thanks for the plug.
Amazing. Yeah, I hope that, this leads to people figuring out who you are, and it's because you definitely have your head in a good spot, and I think you're going to be a future food leader, and I think that's awesome that we had this conversation today.
Oh, thank you so much, and as to you as well. It's really amazing to talk to someone that's such on the forefront of these issues as well. I think it's so important to be able to talk about this in an open discussion and not feel like we're going to be persecuted by the ones that are going to call us snowflakes.
Right, because at the same time, like, also one thing I think I'd like to just kind of plug to everybody is nobody else's opinion matters except your own. Like, if you think that what you're doing is cool, keep doing it. Like, don't worry what these people are saying, because anybody who judges your life does not have their own in order, because people who have their house in order don't care what you're doing as long as you're happy. So
absolutely, 100% agree with that.
Awesome. Well, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and thanks again for taking time out of your day to talk to us.
No worries, and you too. Thanks.
Cheers. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please make sure to give Luke some love on social media. Links to his pages are in the description box below. Do you have a story to tell? Do you know someone who would make a great guest? We are looking for current or former chefs from all over the globe to talk to about the real issues we face in this industry. If you'd like to be featured, please send us an email at consciouschefs@gmail.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us reach a wider audience by liking, commenting, subscribing to our YouTube channel, or sharing this in an industry forum or with a friend. Welcome to the Restaurant Revolution.